The truth. Is it out there? An iconic Hollywood movie line goes, "You can't handle the truth." I want to say, people simply don't care about it. In ancient Rome, the emperor ruled the masses with bread and games. Today, it seems to be the same case. As long as people can feed themselves and be entertained, they don't really care about who rules or how. There is also the matter of obscuring from people certain aspects of life and governing. If you attempt to explain specific things to people, many will not listen. Others will simply refuse to believe. This is said to have been the case in Germany's Third Reich. There were many, for example, who knew about the Action T4, i.e. the mass murder program by involuntary euthanasia. Most people were unable to believe it. Some did not want to believe it. Others flat out dug their heads into the sand, and some people were altogether afraid. And some probably didn't care, and yes, there were also those who agreed with the action. Could it be that something similar is going on today? There is nothing that suggests otherwise. It is in another form for sure. It addresses other issues, uses other methods. But it is surely going on all over the place. All the time. Let's take poverty as an example. To have the fate of being born into poverty lessens one's life expectancy. In ghettos and projects there's higher crime rate, more drug abuse, prostitution, and in general meager future prospects. And living conditions are such that a member of the elite would probably rather commit suicide than fall into that fate. Numerous studies have been made and statistical analyses done about the meager living qualities of poor people in any society. Yet nothing is done about it. We know that if we would eliminate mendicancy, it would improve millions upon millions of lives. It would save countless lives. But just like in Hitler's Third Reich, people either don't believe, won't be bothered, or plainly ignore it. After all, what can you do about it? Could we eliminate poverty? No, we can't. It is just like trying to eliminate ugliness or stupidity. Equality is a myth, a beautiful idea but utterly unattainable. We can look at nature for reference here. Some individuals who are stronger or smarter secure themselves the best hunting grounds. Others have to let do with lesser grounds. It is called natural selection, and has shaped our world forever. We can give the poor people a handout, but it will not change this fact. There are individuals who can break out of poverty because they are stronger and smarter than the average. But we cannot change the average. Scientists are looking into genetically fiddling with the DNA in order to increase strength, intelligence, and so forth, but it will only result in a shift in natural selection. And arguably only widen the gap. If we see humanity in those terms, a lot becomes clearer about the state of affairs we are living in. Throughout the ages, the strong have accumulated wealth. Just start by looking into Europe's Middle Ages. If you were a ruthless strong killer, you could take pretty much what you wanted. A band of armed men plundered villages and farms, ambushed caravans and merchants. A ruthless killer assembled around him like-minded killers. He ruled them because he was the strongest. If anybody opposed him or challenged, he was killed. It was as simple as that. These gangs that are similar to what we today call mafia or cartels grew into small armies, and they settled down into small kingdoms where they protected the farmers and villagers and in turn exploited them through taxation. In fact, the peasants and villagers were the king's or the baron's slaves. This is the basis for all the nobilities in the world. All the kings, the lords, the barons, and the dukes the general public admires so much base their privileges and titles on a ruthless killer Today, most understand that if you already have money, you can earn more money from that money. It is called capital gain. You simply lend it with interest, or you invest it, as it is phrased. And money pretty much bestows more money. This is how most rich people live. This is how clever folk make a living. They would not even consider applying for a job. To do so is to be a slave. It has been pointed out that the only significant difference between slavery and a modern worker is that the modern worker has to take care of himself. The burden of the slave owner has been diminished. So, instead of the slave owner having to provide housing, the worker must rent or buy, through a mortgage, his own home. If the worker gets sick, it is either society or the worker himself who must take care of that. It is in fact a better deal for the master. Now, many people think of slaves as African people working on plantations in America. That is a big fallacy. Slaves have always been around, in almost any society, and they still exist and will exist, as long as humanity is the way it is. In Russia, for example, the common farmers were legally termed serfs, krepostnoy krestyanin in Russian. It was a feudalistic system where the farmers, serfs, belonged to the land. They could not leave and were sold with the land. Different variations of the feudal system existed all over Europe, and a food for thought is the fact that the word Slavic, that now generally means someone from Eastern Europe, originally meant slave. Slavery is nothing new, nothing unique for Europe, and it is thriving well today, just in a slightly different form with a different manifestation. Now, the class system has been written about and studied extensively, so there is nothing new that I am revealing here. My intention is to point out that a natural selection has been going on coincidentally, a point that is of significance here. The ferocious competition for resources and the hardwired need to pass on one's genes has taken on a peculiar and rather cynical form in human society. In order to secure the survival of the genes, the ruling class has resolved into interbreeding practices. This naturally logical trait has resulted in a monotonous gene pool with obvious negative results. Modern science has revealed that the higher class interbreeding exercises throughout the ages was unhealthy, and the monotonic gene pool was becoming degenerative. But the master class has solved that. They simply pick the superior genes from the human pool for themselves. If there is a member of the slave caste they fancy because of beauty or intelligence, they pick those genes and either have an affair with him or her, or simply marry that individual. And hence the British royalty, for example, has begun marrying some prominent and beautiful commoners. This they are not doing in order to mingle with the common people, far from it. It is simply a matter of their own survival and sustainability of their rule, status, and power. Does the general public understand they are slaves? Can they handle that truth? Do they care? Or are they simply content with their bread and games? Because of natural selection, the ruling class has gotten smarter, and coincidentally the slaves have gotten stupider. The only thing holding the slaves above the water, so to speak, is their number. The greater the number, the higher the probability of mutations, and there will always be this odd individual who is intelligent despite being born by low IQ parents. If I tell you now that you are a slave, you will probably not believe me. You might object by pointing out that you are nothing like the African slave on an American plantation. You might say that you can leave and move to wherever you like. You are not forced to live where you are right now, and you can choose to work wherever you please. You might even point out that you have it much better than most people you know of, and you have a lot of things. Well, there is hierarchy among slaves. In America in the 17th and 18th century, there was the house slave who had it somewhat better than the average plantation slave. There is also the master's right-hand slave, the one who bosses the other slaves around. The fact of the matter is that there were other slaves who guarded their fellow slaves, without whom the master would never have been able to cope and control the other slaves. They had it a little better than the average slave, and that setup ensured the whole system. Today we have the police. Whenever there is a riot, the police is used to break it down, even though the people are demanding something that will just as well benefit every individual police officer. They are the guard dogs, like the capos in the World War II concentration camps. Most people are living from paycheck to paycheck, enforced by fear of being homeless and jobless to stay in the system, perpetually running the treadmill. The modern serfdom is in the form of rent, interest rates, mortgage, and loan repayments. The enslavement has changed its form, not its essence. Most parents want their children to get higher education. This is universally an attempt to escape poverty, who many, at least unconsciously, acknowledge being nothing but slavery. What if I was to inform you that education is nothing but an indoctrination to ensure the slave system? Would you believe me? A few decades ago, a child of a worker or a farmer just got basic education, if any. Just enough to be able to function in society and learn the necessary skills to work. After the Second World War, more and more common people were allowed to enter the universities. This was achieved with either free tuition or student loans and grants. At the same time, the real wages of a postgraduate shrank. Today, the average university professor earns less than his predecessor. A university degree will not secure a prospective future in a modern society. It will not even secure a job. Unemployment among university graduates is high and rising. Why then are the masters allowing the poor to enter the universities? Two reasons are obvious. First, to tighten the grip of the slaves. The only way they saw, as a way out of poverty, higher education, is now closed, since so many are graduating. There are so many graduating that the value has decreased. It has become a norm, and therefore it is simply not a way out anymore. The second reason is more significant. Indoctrination. A vice man once said, "We are living in a time when universities are destroying knowledge." If you are a modern baron, let us just call it a slave owner or simply a master, you have considerable gain in educating people to secure your rule. It is like in the Hollywood movie The Matrix, where some of the sleepers within the Matrix were its most ferocious defenders. Like the master's pet slaves. In the universities, one learns how things are, and how things are supposed to be. An academic might exhort critical thinking and individualism, but a closer look will reveal the opposite. Let's take the academic subject of economics as an example. Economics deals with teaching students how society works, concerning allocation of resources, financial transactions, and barters, i.e. trade. It is divided into categories following a few theories as to how things work, or how they might best work. In the beginning of last century, there were two main theories of economics: the free market theory versus the planned market theory. The former was commonly labeled capitalism and the second communism. Universities on both sides of the Iron Curtain spewed out so-called specialists who could academically argue and convince all who were not indoctrinated in their jargon about the necessity of their own economic doctrine. Today, it is said that the free market economy prevailed over the planned economy, and the evidence pointed out is the fall of the Soviet Union, who followed the planned economy. Two fallacies here are so obvious that they scream at anyone with an open mind. First, there is no such thing as a free market. Even according to any economic textbook, there is not a single market in the world who qualifies as being a free market. All markets are more or less not free, and it really is inclined in the very same theory, whereas it is claimed that the free market is an ideal marker that should be aimed at, but in the real world never attainable. Yet, this is the base for an economic model a large portion of the world's economies are based on. Or so it seems. It is a natural way of any transaction to compete. In the economy, on the market, just as in nature. We might start with many players. The justification of a market theory in economics was coined by the Scottish economist and philosopher Adam Smith, which he termed the invisible hand, a mechanism that guides resources to the optimal use for society through purely egoistic reasons. So, following the theory, a fierce competition will ensure optimal allocation of resources and lowest possible prices. The flaw in this theory is that this is a stage that cannot prevail and is at best an initial stage. Just following the logic of the free market theory will reveal to us that the competition will eliminate the lesser contestants until we have only one, or at most, two big competitors. This is evident all around us: Coke, Pepsi, macOS, Windows, East, West. Governments try to counter this unavoidable turn with anti-monopoly laws and antitrust regulations. This is a game and a smokescreen, and the educated gullible economists are a useful tool to kindle the fire for the smoke. Another obvious flaw about current economic doctrine is the statement that the planned economy has run its course and is a failure. In fact, it is far from over and is actually thriving. The second largest economy in the world, and the one predicted to surpass the US economy in the near future, the Chinese economy, is a state-planned communist economy. Yet, any ordinary economy graduate will contemptuously inform you that a planned economy is a failure. This is the power of education in controlling people's perception. And the person least aware of it is the so-called educated person. We can go down the list of academic subjects and reveal the same truth. Is there anyone out there who is willing or able to believe this to be the case? Let's take the subject of history as the most serious example of indoctrination. It has been said that history is written by the conquerors. And if the winner is the master, he of course is the one who decides what enters into the history books. There is this revealing characteristics in the system that one has to have a degree if one is to be taken seriously. And in order to get said degree, you already are indoctrinated. So it is pretty much a failsafe perpetuation. We are living in a system of specialists. They have the same status as the priests of old. Their word is final. The specialists are the authority in any dispute, and in order to become a specialist, one has to have at least a postgraduate university degree, preferably a doctorate, and ideally from an Ivy League institution. How true it is that universities are there to obscure the truth, not to reveal it. They surely are a significant link in the chain of keeping people suppressed. Just the notion that people actually believe it to be the other way around never ceases to amaze me. Can I prove this? Yes, and I will. Even though I seriously doubt that it will convince you. What I will attempt to achieve here is to reveal a certain thing of crucial significance. First, who controls the world? Who decides what is the truth? What is written in the history books? What is the best way to govern? And what is right and wrong? If you are even mildly educated, you will be inclined to say that at least, in the so-called West, the way to govern is decided by the people through democratic processes. Let us examine democracy a little. Anybody will be excused if they claim that we have free elections in the West. On the surface, it surely looks that way. But here we encounter the first trap: the term free. One of the cornerstones of the Western democracies is the concept of freedom. I can assure you, as an aspiring master and a slave owner, one of my main objectives would be to make my subject believe they are free, when they in fact are not. That illusion I would acquire through an educational system. In fact, teach them that they are free. Does this ring a bell? Arbeit macht frei. if you have to work in order to survive. It is the opposite of freedom. This is a typical Orwellian newspeak, turning things on its head. So what about free elections? Do they have anything to do with being free or freedom? First of all, not anybody can run for office. Not anybody can vote for that matter. There are obvious restrictions, such as citizenship for voting, and clean criminal record for running for office. Then there is the question of money, education, prestige, reputation, and not to mention likability and looks. It costs a considerable amount of money to run for office. Any office. Then there is the question of eligibility. Practically, you have to have a higher education to run for office, not because it is stated by law, but rather because it is indoctrinated into the voters. Then, it is the access to media. You have to be connected, and in fact indoctrinated through the political party system to run for office. Yes, in theory, anybody can run, establish a new political party and get elected in a free election in a democratic society. But if one dives into the reality of it all, it is just a surface paint to make people believe they are living in a system they are not. The best way to prove this is to see if the leverage of power has changed since the invention of the free election system, and if people are in general better off. Have the poor, who are the vast majority of any society, become wealthier or even better off than before? Various studies and statistical analyses reveal the contrary. And don't let any specialist tell you otherwise. Half of the world's population lives on less than $7 a day. In the West, children can expect to have lower real income than their parents, and they have lower life expectancy. They have a harder time acquiring a home, have less job security, and expect to work longer hours. The rich have become richer, and the poor poorer. That is, inequality has risen. Practically anywhere where we have the so-called free election system. Contrast that with totalitarian China. There, people are better off. More people have more than before. In 30 years, China has created more billionaires than any country has ever in history. In communist China, the middle class is booming, while in the free West, the middle class is evaporating. There are of course other factors at play here. I am simply pointing out that free elections have not improved people's lives, but it sure has made them think it has. Just as in the case of the so-called free market, which accumulates around two main players, so is it the case in any democratic society. Two main players, A or B, Democrats versus Republicans, left or right. This gives people the illusion of choice, when in fact changing red for blue changes nothing. A choice between a turd and a shit still always gives you just an excrement. Now, you might say, alright, this might be the case, but this does not say who rules the world. You are right, this does not say anything about that. It explains how people are made to believe they control themselves when they don't. So who is pulling the strings? I insinuated before how controlling the educational system is, and it being but a link in manipulating and patrolling people. I have now pointed out how the democratic system is just another form of control. But who actually is controlling? How often have we said, they are controlling everything? We might mean they, the politicians, the bankers, the capitalists, the secret police, the shadow government, and so on. For now, let us just acknowledge that it seems to be instinctively inclined to us to assume that someone is pulling the strings. There is someone out there who is running the show. Again, let us return to nature for guidance. We have seen that the stronger conquers the weak. In human society, the same thing. Now, in most societies, the concept of law has occurred. It is designed to ensure that people can live together in relative peace. You cannot steal from your neighbor, or kill him or her, To take some prime examples. Laws govern what is right and what is wrong. Laws commonly base their legitimacy on religion, which in turn states that they come from God. Of course, there were priests, who were the representatives of God here on earth, and wrote the laws for God, interpreted them, and judged according to them. Then there were kings who were either gods, or at least a direct descendant from them. So obviously, the king's demands were the law. Remember what I said earlier about the origin of royalty. A lot has been said about how laws are written by the strong to protect their interests. What is right is not an objective statement of reality, but a claim by someone who is protecting his rights and ensuring his right to decide what is right. You can see, already in the language, the word right is interchangeable between meaning to be eligible to do something and something being the proper, just thing. Is it right to steal? No, not according to most laws. Would you steal if you got away with it? It seems that stealing is not the same as stealing, and it definitely seems to matter who is stealing and from whom. The kings of old could steal from the peasants, and they did. Eventually, the stealing was institutionalized. They called it tax. In modern societies, we still pay taxes. Many justify it for themselves as they are paying for education, infrastructure, and social services. Stealing, it seems, is acceptable as long as it is done right. A government contractor can steal from the public as long as he can cover it up with expenses. And they all overcharge as high as they possibly can get away with. In other words, they charge the government, i.e. the public, much more than they would a private company or a private individual. In many people's minds, that does not even constitute stealing. Most parliaments decide on their own salaries, and all of them compensate their relatively decent wages with all kinds of perks. Free travel, free cars, paid assistance, free housing, stipends and grants for their political parties, and so on, and even extra for sitting in committees. This is simply not termed stealing or theft. Put into the context of a private firm, one would not expect the employees to decide their own salaries, and then getting extra, on top of that, for the actual work they were in fact hired to do. Almost every employee will steal from his workplace if he or she can get away with it. It will be written off in the books, and the bill will be passed down to the customer. In fact, if you think about it, pretty much everybody is stealing left and right, and the only ones who are being punished are those with the least chances of stealing, the totally obedient zombies, and the poorest of the poor, the shoplifters and the burglars. Joseph Stalin is quoted saying, "Kill one person and it is a murder. Kill thousands and it is statistics." Same goes for stealing and theft. Steal on a large enough scale, and the likelihood of you not only getting away with it, but on top of that actually being admired for it, increases. Yes, thou shalt not steal, except in large enough quantities. In 2008, governments around the West bailed out the banking system. Big international banks had lost billions on spurious loan practices and financial acrobatics. For years, financial institutions had concocted huge bonuses for their top management, on top of their already paramount salaries, by creating new financial products that can only be described as a Ponzi schemes. The profits were privatized, while the losses were passed on to the public. A free market economy? Trillions of dollars were paid out to keep the banks afloat. This was a theft on a galactic scale. Millions were left penniless, homeless, in a state of disarray. Tidal waves of bankruptcies followed. And the ones responsible, golden parachuted. And by whom? By the people? By the majority? Or maybe, just maybe, by the powers that really govern. Tax evasion is another form of theft. We might all want to do it, although it is illegal, especially since it is a form of legal theft in the first place. But the fact of the matter is that the construct of the tax system only allows tax evasion on a large scale. Many are aware of the so-called tax havens. You would be excused to think that those phenomena are just some holes in the system, something that vicious individuals take advantage of to dodge paying their fair share. But no, tax havens like Liechtenstein, the Cayman Islands, or Singapore are there deliberately. It is part of the setup, designed for the super rich so as to allow them to avoid paying taxes. Those are no unfortunate loopholes. You, the little people, are to pay taxes. Taxes are not meant to be paid by the super rich. In fact, if you have to pay taxes, it only means you are part of the slave clan. I can of course go on in length regarding the travesty about the law prohibiting killing another person. Most countries forbid murder and then punish a murder with a death penalty. Anyone who doesn't realize the travesty in that is a well-indoctrinated slave. War is another thing. Most countries have armies where they train soldiers to kill. Albeit it being absolutely reprehensible to murder, it is actually very well appreciated in a war. And the individuals who kill most are awarded with medals of honor. I think I have made my point about the laws. They are based on the will of the strong to ensure his power. Through indoctrination, people are made to believe they have something to do with justice. Another concept that is just an idea. A social construct made to look like a law of nature. And of course, the practice of law is taught in the universities. So, what is wrong and what is right? And does it really matter? Who decides what is right? Those are intriguing questions, and I will attempt to answer them here. Let me focus first on who is eligible to decide on what is right and what is wrong. That actually might point us in the right direction, and hopefully shed some light on who they are. In legal context, one might point to the judge. It is the judge, i.e. the judicial system, that decides what is right and what is wrong according to the law. Well, we wouldn't have all those legal procedures if it wasn't a constant question of interpretation. In other words, it is almost never a clear-cut what is right or wrong according to the law. Dive a little deeper, and you will see that not everybody can afford a lawyer. And the more expensive the lawyer, the more likelihood of winning a case. So, right or wrong obviously has something to do with wealth. A lot, actually. Another obvious thing to consider is the question of who sets the law. In the West, it is the Parliament. So, one is inclined to deduce that it is the majority of the people who decides what is wrong and what is right. There are numerous problems with that assumption, however. Is it always a majority that governs? No, in fact, in most cases, it is a minority. In many democratic countries, the weight of votes is not equal. That is, one vote in this part of the country counts double as the vote from another part, for example. For almost any election result, one can count those who did not vote, add them to those who voted not for the government, and you will end up with a minority-elected government. This is the case in most countries. Most of the time. Consistently, the turnout is less than half the population, so the parliament is not a representative of the majority, let alone the government. Add the children, the mentally disabled and prisoners, who cannot vote in some countries, and you have a seriously skewed majority decision-making apparatus that calls itself a representative parliament. Well, talking about a democracy and its representative layout. An elected individual does not have answer to anybody for not being true to his or her campaign promises. Spice that up with coalition compromises, international trade agreements, supranational laws, and binding treaties and agreements, often concocted in smoke-filled back rooms, and you clearly do not get unbiased or anything remotely resembling a true representative of any nation's majority will. So clearly, the laws are not made by the majority of the people. I pointed out the fault in assuming that we have free elections. I will then add the power of money to affect politicians, lobbyism, bribery, corruption, and legislation forced upon states as from the European Union, for example. In any case, I think it is clear-cut that the majority of the people does not decide which law governs, and what is right and wrong. So who then? Money rules, someone once pointed out. It is justifiable to assume correlational functionality between amount of money and amount of power. The more money you have, the more power you have, and hence the more you can decide what is right and what is wrong. This, I think everybody knows. If that is the case, why do we have parliaments? Good question. I am certain that parliaments are there for a purpose, and that purpose serves the same functionality as the educational system and the games. It is there to soothe the citizen and give him the notion that something is there that really isn't there, i.e. freedom, justice, and equality. This is exactly the setup I would go for if I was to design a system of slaves. It is indispensable to let them think that they are free, can govern themselves, and everybody can accomplish pretty much whatever they fancy. Another thing is essential for me as the master, and that is to ensure that they will not join up on me. There are several issues to consider in that regard. First of all, I must be invisible to them. It is crucial that they will not know of my existence. Therefore, I will teach them that there is no hidden master behind it all, and all talk of that is a stupid conspiracy talk. I also will allow them to think that they can escape poverty and enjoy the freedom of wealth. There are several ways to do that. The silliest, yet surprisingly effective way is the lottery. It is a simple exploitation of dreams. When the slave eyes a way out, no matter how silly and unlikely, he hardens in his devotion to the system. The promise of a carrot can keep a tired donkey running for long. Another key formula is to allow some of them to become somewhat rich. I will allow for well-off celebrities. That will inspire the rest of them to work hard and make them believe in the system, and that the system is just, and in fact the natural way of things. Some of those celebrities have earned their status by hard work and talent. Others are random degenerates that can connect mentally to the masses. By far, however, the most effective way to keep things in check is the old Roman way of rule and divide. The slaves are divided into groups. Religious groups, social, ethnic, classes, nations, etc. This will be even more effective than games to keep them occupied and divert their thoughts away from reality. Wars, on a regular basis, are good. They are also good for the economy. Did you know that wars increase gross national product and is one of the biggest factors in increased productivity and ingenuity in human society? It also keeps the overpopulation in check and hardens the individuals. There are no lazies and freeloaders in a war, nor in the rebuild after a war. A war is in fact the most profitable action a human society can undertake. The undeniable beauty of the contradiction, destruction to rebuild. It is profitable on both sides of the equation, and the slaves never know what hit them, and it keeps them 100% occupied. They have absolutely no time to think about the meaning of it all and why things are the way they are. Best of all, I will finance both sides of the war, because wars costs a lot of money. This will leave them deeply in debt. Both from financing the war, but even more from the rebuild after. It is so ingenious, yet simple, and best of all, nobody is any wiser. And how easy it is to get them into war. This is something most people can at least conceive as a fortuity for the motives behind current affairs, and as of who really is pulling the strings. And this could serve as an anecdote pointing toward them. They are obviously very powerful, and powerful we have established as someone who has a lot of money. So they must be very, very rich. Now, a thought experiment. Can you imagine someone so rich that he can buy whatever his mind desires? He has the biggest private jet, mansions in every country he so wishes. The best of cars, all the sex and drugs his mind can think of. Gold, properties, power, and land you and I will never lay our eyes on. He has done it all, many times over. There is basically nothing left for him to experience. There is nothing to be excited about, nothing to look forward to. Nothing left but the unavoidable looming death. Well, there might be one thing he could occupy his mind with. Play people like pieces on a chessboard. Use the world as a board game. Someone who has achieved everything, satisfied all his bodily desires, could conceivably aspire to control and mold people and societies to his desire. Really control the world. Groom humanity, like a rat in a maze. Who would not want to take on the task of seeing how far one could go in manipulating people if one had that power? It is said that people do things just because they can. If a scientist can clone a man, he will do it just because he can. Damn the consequences and morality. Can you perceive the picture of two wealthiest men in the world sitting together over a cup of tea, coming up with something aspiring, like Phileas Fogg in the famous novel, Around the World in 80 Days? One says, "I bet I can create such a fear among the world population that they will lock themselves in their own little cages. Shut down their economies, stop all traveling, and basically stop everything. Empty the streets of traffic, create a panic and make people so petrified that they will scream for some vaccine nobody knows didgeridoo about. And this I bet you I can achieve without the use of force, violence, police, or an army." And the other one replies, "If you will be able to do that, the grinding will stop and some revenue will be lost." The other one then states, "Not to worry. After I have halted everything for a year or two, we simply start a war. And the grinding will go full swing again in an instant. And we will have cleaned up a bit the abase and the mold. After all, we must do something about the negative effect the herds are having on our planet." When you are this rich, you lose a certain aspect of reality. People of this status do not regard ordinary people, i.e. people, the same way you and I. They see people as cattle. We can see that throughout history. The Roman emperors, the Egyptian pharaohs, the Chinese emperors, the kings of Europe and the Inca kings, the Sapa Inca, did not regard human life highly. In fact, one can argue that they despised it. Saw it only as instrumental for their own satisfaction, and if it was of no use, they eliminated it as easily as most of us squash a bug. Why would the uber rich today be any different? After all, they are more powerful, richer, and learned than the emperors and kings of old ever were. I want to assert that most of us cannot even imagine the wealth some people have. Many of us can conceptualize some pretty wealthy people and their circumstances. But believe me when I say that there are individuals so wealthy, we can't even begin to fathom how wealthy they are. There are individuals that are so rich they make Louis XIV look sad. Can you wrap your head around that? The thing is that when we humans are dealing with big numbers, we have limited capacity. We can picture 1,000, but when it comes to 100,000 we begin to struggle. Several 100,000, and we are pretty much lost. Bigger than that, and we are in the realm of abstraction. None of us can, for example, comprehend the $3.1 trillion US fiscal deficit. That amount is incomprehensible to us. Just like we cannot grasp how many stars there are in our Milky Way galaxy or how old the Earth is, and she is only 4.5 billion years old. You might have heard about the Forbes list of the richest people in the world. If so, you know of individuals like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos. Those guys are worth billions of dollars. But what if I was to inform you that there are much, much wealthier people out there who never appear on that list? And do you know why? Because they simply do not want you to know how wealthy they are. Appearing on a list is a show-off, really a poor man's game. A despicable vanity of the typical nouveau rich. You don't believe me? The official figure of the Saudi royal family is said to be around $1.4 trillion. This is their personal worth. Saudi Arabia itself is worth $31 trillion, and of course it is practically owned by the Saudi royal family and ruled by the head of that house. And yeah, those are the official figures. We can pretty much assert that the real figures are higher, way higher. Now, here comes the manipulation. The Saudis are never listed among the richest persons on the Forbes list. Why would they appear there? They make the Forbes guys look poor. The so-called richest man in the world listed there, in 2021, was Jeff Bezos, worth a meager amount of only $177 billion. Not a lot next to the Saudis, right? Another powerhouse is the Rothschilds. Their accumulated wealth has been estimated in the trillions. Nobody really knows, except the Rothschilds themselves. I can mention the British monarchy. The net worth of King Charles, not including the wealth of the monarchy as a whole, stands in the hundreds of millions of pounds, but the exact figure remains shrouded in mystery. And of course they do not have to pay taxes. This is of course just some outsider's estimate. The House of Windsor does not release information on the firm's total assets. The Vatican is another subject of interest here. The Vatican spokespersons say that it is impossible to estimate the exact amount of its wealth. But rest assured, it is for sure the world's most wealthiest organization, and of course the Vatican is a tax-exempt organization and a nation-state in its own right. Pay attention to the formulations. The House of Windsor does not release information on the firm's total assets, and the exact figure remains shrouded in mystery, and it is impossible to estimate the exact amount. I wonder why that is. Most of us couldn't even know how to begin fantasizing about gaining $1 million, let alone billion. So you can forget about the trillion. And we are talking trillions here. Many, many trillions. The Shadow Masters control without being noticed. They are formless, shapeless, like water. They control without being noticed. The whole secret lies in confusing the subjects so that they cannot fathom their real intent. There is a cabal unfolding, and there are powerful people behind it. Be sure of that. Why? Because they can. Be extremely subtle, even to the point of formlessness. Be extremely mysterious, even to the point of soundlessness. Thereby you can be the director of the opponent's fate. That is their mantra. So, have I answered who they are? I hope so. At least as well as it is possible to point out someone who does everything in his power to be obscure. And they are very, very powerful indeed. At the very least, I hope I have provoked in you the urge to look into it further. Question everything. Things are not always as they seem, in fact they hardly ever are. There is knowledge beyond the intellect. Use it in your favor, and you will know that knowledge is power.